right. Okay, I see a few more people coming in. Let's go ahead and get started because the 2 hours are going to go by very quickly. So again, good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Avery, and again, I'm Director for the Center of Excellence for Marine Manufacturing and Technology. Welcome to this professional development webinar on building a portfolio of professional practice in implicit bias and mentorship in implicit bias. The Implicit Bias Institute is a project that is sponsored by 4 centers of excellence: marine manufacturing, agriculture and natural resource, careers and education, and construction, and the Machinists Institute. Last year, we started a very successful webinar series, and it continues this year. So we're really happy to bring today's professional development to you. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to go over the agenda with you very quickly before I turn it over to Dr. Cameron Wedding. So Dr. Cameron Wedding is going to be our first speaker today on building a professional portfolio of practice. And Dr. Cameron Wedding is a recognized and published scholar and professor of race, gender, and social class disparities. She's past chair of the Women's Studies and Ethnic Studies Department at Sacramento State University. Dr. Cameron Wedding is an internationally recognized expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion and implicit bias. She works with groups such as the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, as well as nonprofit, public, and private organizations globally. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Cameron Wedding here today. We're also thrilled to have Zenovia Harris with us. Zenovia is a powerful speaker. I've been in the room with her before. It's a lot of fun. It'll be fun via online as well. She is a published author and an innovator. She is president and CEO of the Kent Chamber of Commerce. Zenovia is a certified diversity professional and serves as the president of the Washington Diversity Council Advisory Board. And she has, in the last decade, worked in higher education, and we're very, very happy to have her here today, sharing her expertise and talking to us about mentorship. So before I turn it over to Dr. Cameron Wedding, I'll go through the agenda very quickly. Dr. Cameron Wedding will present for about 45 minutes, and then you'll take a quick 5-minute break. Zenovia will join us after the break to talk about mentorship. Then we'll have a facilitated Q&A. So during the presentation, if you've got questions, please share those in chat. Kenna is going to be our Q&A person today. You'll also find resources that'll be loaded up in chat throughout the presentations. Kim is going to be doing that. And at the end, we'll have a very quick survey that we would ask you to take, and that will be loaded into chat as well. So we're very happy to have you all here today. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cameron Wedding.
Good morning, everyone. I wish I could see everybody today because this is always so much fun to be able to present these webinars and have this conversation and engage with people, particularly on the subject of implicit bias. And this one is, as you know, is a little different. Many of you have taken our webinars and taken our institutes, have been involved in them. But this one, it gets to focus on your work a little bit more than perhaps we've done in the past. So I'm very excited about that. So I've been doing this work, as I've said to you many times, for a long time. And so this is really exciting. I don't think I've ever given as much concentrated attention to my own portfolio as I have since I've started working on this project. So it's really been a good opportunity for me to reevaluate my work and even to share some of my journey with you as well. So, but someone are you could you advance the slide? I can't remember who's supposed to do it. Great, thank you. So the objectives today, we're going to talk about the history of implicit bias. I think it's really important for people to understand how implicit bias came about. And what we know to be true is that implicit bias involves a lot of different categories and types of bias that people will experience. And all of us, as we know, experience biases. But a lot of my work is going to talk about race with regard to implicit bias. And then we're going to talk about how you can develop that, or how you can identify the focus that you are the most inspired by. The part two, we're going to talk about building your portfolio of professional practice. And I want you to think about, how do you tell your story? Because that is where a lot of our power is in our ability to tell our story. As a matter of fact, I would say that in my work, particularly given that this conversation is so hard. And by the way, I should mention that I started doing this work when there was, probably 4 years, maybe less than 6 years for sure, after the Civil Rights Act was passed. So I started doing this work when we had just entered the colorblind phase, when you're not supposed to talk about race. You're not supposed to think about race because race doesn't matter. But I entered this conversation because it was something I felt passionate about. And I think I've been able to tell my story. And I think that has really done a lot to support my work along the years. And then finally, I will talk about or provide some ideas about how you can identify ways to showcase your own work. All right, next slide, please. So part one, next slide, please. Great, thank you. I had to enlist the support of my wife, who's also my IT tech. So, all right, so now let's hope that mine is going to advance. Great. So I wanted to also talk about the self-reflection. Self-reflection, I haven't gotten back to the poll question. Sorry, I will get back to those in just a little bit. But self-reflection is really important in this work. I think one of the hardest things for me has been the fact that I was embarking upon a conversation where there is no space for. Historically, particularly as early as I started, there was no space to talk about race in public settings. And so I had to create that. And I want you to know that just, my own learning was, just because I'm Black doesn't make me an expert. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm comfortable talking about it. To this very day, I have to do a great deal of self-reflection, because my goal is to keep people in the room and keep people in the space. There are a lot of decisions that have to be made, and the Harvard Implicit Association test was very useful to me. And I chose to focus on implicit bias, I think in like 2005, and the work of Harvard Implicit Association test was still fairly new then, but I think it has really proven to be very useful and very successful. So continue to do your own self reflection every day. It's not like a one-time fits all. It means that we have to do this work every day in order to really accomplish our goals of making a difference in the world of reducing biases and improving outcomes for people. So, if you asked me to name one of the greatest discoveries in the past 50 years, I love this slide because I really think it really explores and speaks to how powerful the discovery of implicit bias has been in shaping our society. It has made a huge difference, whether we're talking about gender, race, sexual orientation, it doesn't matter. It's like before 1995, when this work was first introduced, we didn't have any science well, we had very little science to support it. And now the science is out there, it has been vetted, and it has been proven to be highly, highly reliable. So I'm very excited that we have access to this work of implicit bias. So implicit bias is not just about race, as we know, it's about many different categories, and you get to choose. You get to choose what you're most passionate about: gender, age, race, disabilities, religion. You get to choose. I chose race, and I chose race because I was living in a historical context in which I felt like much of my life was really dependent upon my ability to articulate or to share with people the importance of race. And I have provided and mentioned, I've done this work in many different countries, parts of the world, as well as many different states in the United States. And I remember once I was in China. I was actually in Hong Kong. I was presenting at the University of Hong Kong, and I was talking about stereotypes. And all of my students in the classroom were Chinese students, many of whom had never been to the United States. And I asked them, could you please tell me, what are the stereotypes you know about the 4 major race and ethnic groups in the United States, whether we're talking about indigenous Native people, African Americans, Asian Americans, or people who were Latinx people. And they were able, in particular, I was struck by the fact that they were able to recite every single racial stereotype about Black Americans that exists. And that told me something. It told me, considering that most of these students had never been to the United States, it told me that racism and racial biases can be one of America's greatest exports. And so we have to understand the importance of all these categories. And for me, it was important for me to understand the power of racism. But like I said, we've come a long way. We've seen historic decisions with regard to fair housing. The US Supreme Court referenced implicit bias in a ruling that allowed federal action against housing policies that would have had a disparate impact. We saw, I think, for the first time during Hillary Clinton's campaign, when she referenced the word implicit bias, and it made headlines because people were not talking about it very much. The other thing is, in California, we introduced about 2 years ago in California's Racial Justice Act. And basically this will allow, and this does allow, people who are convicted of a crime or who have been imprisoned for a crime, they can challenge whether or not there is implicit bias in the court ruling. And I had the opportunity to write one of the first declarations for that law. And it's a powerful law. So my point is that implicit bias, now that we have the science, it is taking us a long way in terms of achieving our goals of not only diversity and inclusion, but also opportunities for people in all categories. So why, given the success of implicit bias and the achievements that it has brought to our society, how it has improved the quality of life for so many people, why are so many people trying to ban it? And I would say that it's the idea of implicit bias is being marred and harmed by accusations of it being part of a critical race theory, which, by the way, I'm sure some of you have heard about critical race theory. I'm sure all of you have heard about critical race theory. And I just want to point out, particularly regardless of which of the categories you're going to focus on, understand that critical race theory is a ruse. That's not the real problem. The real problem is what we saw in 2020 and 2021, is that people realized there was a sensitivity towards understanding implicit bias, that people wanted to know what is happening, and how could they improve things. And there are, whether it's not comfortable for me to say this, but what's true is that not everyone wants equality and fairness. And so that's why we had color blindness, which was to suppress the public discourse on race. And now we have this ban on critical race theory and implicit bias, and any conversation that will bring about equality. So we need to know that we have to keep the conversations going, because this is our only opportunity to improve and achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion for our society. Education is the best way for us to do that. Hopefully all of you will. I'm just wondering, can you see my screen? Okay, hopefully all of you will understand the role of education, and as educators, your responsibilities and your role and your ability to make a difference in the classroom, as well as in policy setting. So regardless of whether you're a faculty person, administrator, dean, or an employer in workforce education, it's like we all have a role to play improving outcomes. So how do we get there? So part two, I want to talk about building a portfolio of professional practice. And I want to start, and I may have said this before, what inspires you? So did we have the results of that poll question? What inspires you?
Yes, can you see that poll too?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I don't see it. Well, I'll keep going.
Would you like us to go over the results of it? So, out of the questions, there are some really big outliers as far as percentages were concerned.
Oh, great. Yes, because I can't see it on my screen.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll start with, I guess, one of the biggest ones. So 41% of this room said what inspires them for doing this work is apply equity and diversity strategies to address bias. And then the second would be 28% said identify strategies to address and reduce their own bias. Then it went down to 19%, develop your professional implicit bias portfolio. And then we had 9% at use yourself as an example for how others can work to mitigate bias. And then the last is tell your story about your implicit bias journey. So 41% heavily apply equity and diversity strategies to address biases, probably in their workplace. I can't see the entire question.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zenovia. All right, so let's talk more about that. So what we have is that when we're looking at developing a professional portfolio, obviously we need to know who we are and what we bring to the table. And that may look different for everybody. It's clear from the results of that second poll question that people really are engaging in this work in many different levels. And so it's important that you continue to hone in on that. So in creating a portfolio plan, it's important to know your highest level skills. And I knew that. I worked in as a career development trainer, or yes, I guess that was one of my training experiences for a while. And I did that work at the university. And so I was really focused on, what is my highest level skill? And I knew one of my highest level skills was to communicate with people, even about difficult topics. So translating what you feel good about in terms of the work about yourself that you feel really strongly about, translating that into a profession is what most people do, whether they realize that they're doing it or not. Most people are very interested in taking something that you love doing and turning it into a job, a paid profession, something you feel passionate about. The one thing about this work, I started out doing a lot of volunteer work. When I had another job, I was able to volunteer. I wanted to practice my presentations and all of my coaching work that we do in trainings. I always have people do a capstone project, for example, so that they can practice teaching this work. It's a way that you can do it without feeling too uncomfortable, and you can actually develop a lot of skills and a lot of training, and also get the feedback from people that you're working with. I also spend a lot of time, if you look at the second category, I spend a lot of time going to trainings, and you have access to a lot right now. I don't think I've ever seen so many trainings and webinars and opportunities for certification that I've seen since 2020. I've also done a lot, and I would encourage people. I always encourage people. I always encourage my students and others to join things, get involved. Boards, nonprofit organizations. Because I was interested and I had been the chair of women's studies at the time for many, many years, I applied for a governor's appointment as on the California Commission on the Status of Women. And you would be surprised how many of these boards and commissions are looking for competent, qualified people. So it's really important that you get your name out there. Your name should become, as you are engaged in this work, your name should become synonymous to the work that you're doing. People should, when they think of implicit bias, they can think of you. And when they think of somebody who they can rely on, they can think of you. You also have the benefit right now of, all of the social media that you can use to learn new things, as well as share who you are. LinkedIn has a lot of programs that people can participate in. The Curran Institute on the Study of Race and Ethnicity. I have some slides at the end that I'm going to share with you. And a lot of these slides will take you to other resources that will help you expose you to more of this work. Also seeking out city or county, state leadership opportunities. Those are things that are always great, and they look really great on your resume. The last category is the last category is for you to, I can't see this. There you go. I talked about social media. The other thing I want to mention is that there's a great book called The Memo. I don't have it on my slide, on the slide deck, but I would also encourage you to check that book out, because that book talks a lot about networking, the importance of networking, and making your work known in your department, your field, at your college or university, and to a broad audience. So those things are very, very important. So tell your story, become your story, be self-reflective. All these things are really critical to your doing your work in this field. I also want to say this work is not easy. And I think one of the hardest things for me in my journey of doing this work, the hardest thing for me was standing in front of a room full of judges talking about implicit bias, particularly because my focus was race. So talking about it in front of judges who needed to say, it was their job to believe that they had been trained to believe that they didn't have any biases. And there are still many, many people who don't believe judges have biases, but of course we know that everyone does have some type of biases, and most of us have some kind of racial bias, including myself, which I have to work on constantly. That's where the self-reflection comes in. So find out, where are the places, where are the gaps in your learning, where are the gaps in your understanding of this work that will allow you to improve outcomes. because that is going to be very critical for you to build and grow stronger in your work. And what are your fears and what are your anxieties? But there's a place for everyone to do this work. And by the way, the more people we have engaged in this work, the stronger we will be in this work, because our organizations will rely on building a strong infrastructure. We can't always rely on just simply experts. So some of you, many of you want to, and some of you are probably already experts in your area, but also your presence is going to expose everyone, even when you're not in a training capacity, just in terms of your ability to articulate this critical dialogue in conversations, in meetings. It's going to expose your organization to a new level of understanding of how implicit bias can impact decision-making. So I want to share these resources with you very quickly. And the first one I'm going to share, sorry, I'm trying to move this around. The first one I want to share is a Privilege Institute that's been going on for quite some time. It's called Feeling, Healing, and Belonging. It used to be called the White Privilege Conference. Now I think it's called the Privilege Institute. So that is happening actually in May. So I strongly encourage you to look into that if you're interested in that. And then, of course, here are some other resources that are available to you. Some of them I strongly recommend, particularly as you know, my work is focused on race. So a lot of these have to do with race, but they also have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. So lots of resources. Hope you find something that works for you. And thank you so much for your time.
Okay, we are going to take a 5-minute break, and then Zenovia is going to present her session. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's been about 5 minutes, so we are going to have Zenovia start her portion of the presentation.
Great, wonderful. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everybody. My name is Zenovia Harris, and I am the Chief Equity Officer at Zenovia Harris Consulting Firm, which is my firm where we believe in DEI messaging, where practical application is the best method for enacting change related to DEI initiatives. And so if you've heard me speak before, you know that I kind of pride myself on allowing our participants to walk away today with something that they can do almost immediately to change DEI within their workplace or create more equity within their workplace. And so we all know that, bias is built into our systems, whether that's our educational system, whether that's our hiring systems. Biases are built into these systems, and it's not until we begin to make decisions that are unbiased that is going to unravel those disparities that really impact our underserved communities. And so I just want to make a note that I know Dr. Rita just kind of went over implicit bias, so I'm not going to beat that down. But what I will say is I do want to make the note that everyone has bias, and I'm okay with that. And a little bit later on, I'll kind of share some of my biases and how they show up in my ability to mentor or be a mentee. But I do want to make the note that when you are making a decision based on your bias, then that becomes a prejudice. And that is where we draw the line, or basically where I draw the line, right? So I'm aware that I have biases. I'm okay with those biases, but I try not to make those decisions based off those biases, because then that makes my decision-making prejudice. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up. Again, in this space, I'd like to just thank Anne and Kim for allowing me the opportunity to have access to their audience. I think that they've done a phenomenal job at putting together these institutes and bringing in speakers that are very relevant and timely, and also just great speakers. And then I do want to have this be a little bit interactive. And so I know we all don't have our cameras on, but I hope at some point you are able to join us in the chat. I just have a few questions just so that we can do an overview of who's in the room and making sure that the information I'm giving you is timely and relevant, and you can kind of walk away with something today. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to kind of going over this presentation with you. So the next thing real quick is just the agenda. Our time today is going to be very short, but I really want it to be interactive. And before I go over the agenda, I always like to say that we are in a safe space to grow and to learn. And so as a speaker, I understand that we have folks in the room coming to this conversation as a 1, and we have folks coming into this conversation as a 5. Myself even being a speaker, I'm not a 5 because I always learn something in these interactions, and I'm definitely okay with that. As Rita was talking, I was definitely writing information down in different resources to help me build my portfolio. So just a few norms for the room today. I always want you to speak from your perspective, not someone else's perspective. And this is a safe place to be honest. So if you are the outlier in any particular question, that does not make it bad. That just makes it that your experience is different than the other folks that are in this room. And so we are going to talk about the importance of mentorship and workforce development. We're also going to talk about bias in mentorship. I always think it's important to talk about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. There's a huge difference, and one allows everyone in this room to be a sponsor. And then the last are just some best practices here as well. That's a really great question. I see in the chat that someone said, how do you know that this is a safe space? It is a safe space because, again, Rita and Anne has already told us there are a lot of folks that are in this room that have taken parts of this implicit bias training over the last couple of years. I also, as a presenter, will make sure that your voice is heard if you have a question. So safety to me seems like you can say something. I can validate what you're saying by statistics, by numbers, and then also just not allowing anyone to kind of beat you down. This presentation is recorded, and so I'll have to kind of lean on the presenters, or I'm sorry, lean on Kim or Ann as far as how far this information goes. But I deem it a safe space because answered. If I can't answer it today, I will make sure that we reach back out and get that answer for you. And then also, this is the beauty about being online. You can just change your name if you want to, and then you can put in the chat whatever you like. But again, I just deem it a safe space. And I think we are all here. There's a lot of things that we can be doing today other than being on this Zoom call with probably 45, 50 strangers. And so my heart tells me that everyone is here for the right reasons. And so for that reasons, I will deem it a safe space. All right. And so last, some best practices, we'll go over those as well. All right. Okay. So our time together, like I said, it's going to be brief, but it's definitely going to be productive. And I have the honor of talking about bias in mentorship. There's a lot of different ways that we can have this conversation, but today it's going to be a little bit more focused on you as a mentor and identifying biases that are going to keep you as a mentor safe and also keep your mentee safe. So if you can safely, I'd like for you all to close your eyes. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I really just want you to imagine this as I'm telling you or I'm calling this out. So again, safely, if you can, just kind of close your eyes. And I want you to imagine that I can set you up with the perfect mentor. I can set you up with the perfect person that's going to help you move forward in your career, in your life, in your new career, in your education. I want you to picture that person. And so I also want you to picture what they look like, what title they have, how much money they're making, how much impact they have in the community. And I really want you to think about who that person is. And we all know what biases, they come in pretty quickly. So I want you to quickly think of who this person is. Now open your eyes. How many of you pictured a Black woman? How many of you pictured a student in your classroom? How many of you pictured a colleague that maybe has and I'm using air quotes for those that can't see me, a lower title or less impact in the organization? How many of you pictured a person of the opposite sex? Okay, so I'm asking those questions because I want you to understand how quickly our biases show up in everything that we do, even in who we choose to learn from and who we teach and how we teach them. And so I have a little poll question here, not in the poll, but in the chat. I just want you to put a number 1 if you have been a mentor in the past.
Do you mean any kind of mentor or an implicit bias mentor?
Any kind of mentor for anything. Good, great. Put a number 2 in the chat if you have been a mentee. Awesome. And tell me, because these should be successful relationships, right? So if you achieve success due to your mentorship. Good. Awesome. And then last, put a 4 if you are aware of sponsorship, aware of the difference between sponsorship and mentorship. Awesome. Okay. Good. Well, I will definitely spend a little bit more time on the sponsorship versus mentorship, because I think it's really, really important. All right, so mentorship at its core, this is a great little graphic that I found online. I did not create this, but it really gives you a comprehensive definition of the roles and responsibilities of a mentor. And it helps with the psychological support that is necessary in order for a mentor-mentee relationship to thrive. And so number one, I want to talk about with mentoring, there needs to be goals. Those need to be both short-term and long-term goals. That's not something as the mentor that you come up with. That is something that you come up together with your mentee. So you definitely want to have a understanding of what those goals are supposed to be. Coaching is definitely necessary. And I'll say this because I've had a mentor and I've been a mentee. I've had both successful and unsuccessful experiences. And most of that came to the coaching piece and not choosing a mentor that had the ability, because of their teaching style, to be able to coach me through opportunities that I was going through, or experiences I was going through. Advice is definitely necessary. You are giving and lending your advice. And what that looks like is you're talking about things that work for you and things that do not work for you within your organization or whatever the field is that you're mentoring, especially when we're talking about workforce development. We're talking about even implicit bias. Those are two very specific or different disciplines. And so if you are mentoring someone about implicit bias and kind of how it shows up in your life, that advice is going to be critical. These are the things that worked for me, and these are the things that did not work for me. I always say this, and it is definitely true, that I have just a tidge of imposter syndrome. And so I'm constantly going into rooms and questioning, why am I in this room? Why am I speaking? Why am I given grace? Why am I having these opportunities? And that's because biases have really impacted my life, because folks have maybe assumed that I shouldn't be in a room, or assumed based on my education or lack thereof that I should have an opportunity. So one thing that I lean on for my mentor is motivation, less really the goals. I'm really good at writing down my goals. I take advice from everyone that I encounter, but it's that motivational piece. How do I, continue to go forward, even though there are, in my opinion and what I feel, folks that are rooting for me to fail. And so I'm looking for a mentor really to talk about that motivation or be able to motivate me. Direction. What does that look like? What direction are we going? And are we steadfast in that direction as a mentor? That direction may change. And when you are mentoring someone specifically about, like we said, building this portfolio of implicit bias, or learning more about bias and how it shows up, you have to be lock and step. You cannot be, as a mentor, in front of your mentee and kind of dragging them along. You want to be side by side, hand in hand, ensuring that you all are going in the same direction. And when you're not, you need to be able to stop, clarify, give statistics, give data, whatever that looks like for both you and your mentor or your mentee, to be able to move forward. And then training. This is not something like Dr. Cameron said, this is just because I'm a Black woman, and that doesn't make me an expert. It is my training. It is putting myself in different situations, putting myself in a place to learn and be open, no matter what that looks like. And so training is definitely necessary if you're going to mentor within this space. And then support, and that's just as simple as it is. It's, you need to be there as a support system, and support systems, folks that are mentors also need their support. So you are looked at as the kind of the foundation for this person, whoever they are, moving their career to the next level. And then lastly, success. How are you going to define success? So in my mentor relationships, as you're writing out your goals, it may be, I want to be a better public speaker. I want to be able to have a variety of workshops that I can do on implicit bias or leadership and bias, right? what does that success look like? Does it look like that mentor has helped me facilitate a relationship with somewhere where I can give those workshops? Or does it look like creating those workshops? I mean, you really have to be specific and intentional. And I know that we have a lot of education folks in the room. Educators is what I was trying to say. We have a lot of educators in the room. And you know that when you give a student a goal and you tell them what success looks like, the outcome is going to be better, right? And so you have to look at it in that exact same way, that you have to be very specific about your goals. You have to be going in the same direction and at the pace that is beneficial to the mentee. And you are there to actually motivate, but to help you, you want to make sure that you have the training that you need in order to be successful. So again, there's some external development functions like career support, advocacy, coaching, facilitating exposure, all of those things. And again, at the end of this, there will be a resource sheet that we send out to help you kind of go over all this information. Again, we only have about 45 minutes today. All right. So now, perfect. All right, so what are the major components of mentorship? And the major components of mentorship are pretty easy. So number one, mentorship needs to be on a cadence. And again, that's a relationship that you've built with the mentee. What does that cadence look like? Are we meeting once a week? Are we meeting once a week? Are we meeting online? Is there pre-work? You have to have that cadence set up. Most folks that are a mentor have a job that may be demanding. And so if you have it on a calendar, then it's going to be easy for you to both commit for yourself and then also for your mentee to commit. It also helps with structure. Again, I keep bringing everything back to the classroom. When there's something on a cadence, students know when things are due, the success rate is going to be better. So again, making sure that it's on a cadence, also ensuring that there is a plan. Before you start meeting with a mentee, you want to make sure that you all have a plan in place to make sure that you are the person that's going to be able to take them to the next level. And then once you have that plan in place, you as the mentor now need to figure out, how do I evaluate this plan? How are we going to evaluate the success of this relationship? And I always want to know what the end result, what the student wants the end result to be. I mentor a lot of students, what they want that result to be, but then also who am I going to pass that student off once I've given all that I can give, and then they can go on to the next level, because it's not all about me. It's about me giving them access to my resources and giving them access to different educational opportunities. So evaluating at what point does this relationship end, and that person can move to the next level. And then capabilities. You have to be very clear as a mentor what your capabilities are. And don't be afraid to say, that's not in my wheelhouse, but I do have access to a person or a place or a thing that can provide you what you're looking for. So capabilities is very important. Also on the mentee's end, is now a good time to be a mentee? Do they have the time to structure or to plan out what this relationship looks like? Learning methods. COVID-19 did a lot of things. One of those things that I was well aware of is that learning online is not an issue. I spent almost 10 years at an online university. And so when COVID-19 hit, I was excited for the fact that we could show folks a new way to learn and a new way to engage with one another, and that was online. So as a mentee or a mentor, you need to look at the different learning methods that are available to you. And so now it just gives you more access. Like before, I couldn't really mentor someone in California. I couldn't mentor a friend in a different state or at a different organization, because like, we got to meet for coffee on Tuesdays, the first Tuesday of the month. It was very antiquated in which folks were engaging in mentorship. But now we have a lot of different options available to all of us. And then be honest about what worked and what didn't work. This isn't about I am perfect as a mentor, I know everything. It really is about, these are the things that have worked for me. these are my experiences, and this is how I believe you can, this is how I believe as a mentee that you can move forward. I want to pause there because I know I just went over a lot of things, and I know we'll have a Q&A, so Kenna, forgive me for that, but I just want to make sure that I'm not leaving anyone behind or anyone doesn't have any questions on this specific slide, because again, I'm just kind of going through it pretty quickly. Okay. So all of these elements of mentorship, what they really do is for us to seek to understand and to appreciate our differences. And so biases are going to show up in these different relationships different relationships that we have. And the experiences, again, this is why in the very beginning I asked you, do you picture a student of yours? Could you imagine asking a student to be a mentor and you are a faculty member? That might be difficult for some of us to do. So it's very important that you kind of take away, and again, I have a slide for this, but you take away those biases that you have as it relates to who you can learn from and how you will learn. Awesome. Trying to advance slides here. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So then here are some best practices. And these best practices are related to your mentorship. So number one, the best practice is to define the relationship. Define, I mean, write down for both you and your mentee to see, what does this relationship look like? And when does this relationship end? Define the relationship so much so that you know exactly what you are as a mentor supposed to be doing for that person. Again, if I'm going to a mentor relationship, it's less about access. I have a good amount of access based on my job function. So I think Rita mentioned this in the beginning, that I'm also the CEO of the Kent Chamber of Commerce. And so by that title, you would think that I have a lot of access, and which I do, but I don't have access to the things that I want. I don't have access to the people who are going to help me move my career forward as it relates to implicit bias. So I would be very intentional with my mentor in regards to defining the relationship and what it is or who it is that they could give me access to. That goes to exposure opportunities. And I wrote it down. Rita talked about it a little bit earlier, is the boards and commissions and different things that you'll use to build your portfolio. But honestly, those are different ways to get yourself exposure. And those are the mentors that you want to seek out as well. So it may be that, you know, in the past you heard you mentor someone that's in your office. A lot of organizations, especially our larger organizations, they have programs that allow you to tap into mentorships at higher levels. But what if you don't want to be in that position anymore? You don't want to be in that organization and you want to do something in a different field. Well, getting involved in different service clubs, getting involved in different boards and commissions and work groups, those are the ways that you expose yourself to different people with different access. And that's really what you need to do. Your mentor may not be in your building. Your mentor may not be in your industry. Your mentor can very well be in a different field, and maybe you have no understanding of that field, but because you put yourself in those uncomfortable positions or those new positions, you now have been exposed and letting people know what you want. This is also why it's important that we bring our whole selves to work and we bring our whole selves to all of our interactions, because I think that that gives you a little bit more access to a mentor that is going to be able to move you forward. Like DEI work, mentorship is challenging, and it must be challenging. I get bored really quickly. So if something isn't challenging, I actually don't thrive in that don't thrive in that environment, but it's going to be challenging, and that's okay, because the mentorship is for both of you to grow. Not everyone knows everything. And so again, when you're talking about bias, you're thinking about being a mentor, that you are on this kind of higher level, right? But what you really are is just a person who has a little bit more experience in something, but that doesn't mean that your mentor couldn't bring something to you. So it's going to be challenging for your mindset to kind of shift as a mentee, or I'm sorry, as a mentor, that you should be open to learning from your mentee for sure. And that is going to be challenging because of the biases that we have are related to this, this relationship. Also, same identity relationships. This is probably one of the hardest things that I have had to come to the conclusion that just because it is another Black woman and she has a what I would say is a great title, that doesn't mean that's going to be the best mentor for me, or because she's a woman. There's some similarities there. There's some reasons why you would seek out someone of the same race, someone of the same gender. That's easy. That's our bias. But again, if you look at the plan, or you look at what you're trying to get from that relationship, be open-minded to that might not be the person that you're looking for. That person, what they physically look like might not be what you're used to. So the same identity relationships, understanding that again, in this relationship, the job is to move you forward one. And how you move forward is understanding someone else's perspective. What I mean by that, if I'm mentored by a woman, most of her interactions have been, and I'm talking, let me be specific, I'm talking a cisgender woman, and I'm a cisgender woman. So our interactions in the workplace may be the same. That really isn't going to help me because I've also experienced that. I would really like to hear from the male perspective why these things happen or how they come about. I'll give you an example. So I am always fascinated before I go into a meeting or a boardroom, I call it pitch day, because those are those meetings where it's like, I really want to get this idea off the ground. I really want someone to know this is a great idea. I see men more than women outside of that room prepping each other. Like, hey, you're going to go in here. I'm going to support you. I have you on this idea. This is what we're going to do. And it's almost like it's your idea, but we're going to do it together. And I don't really see women doing that. And so for me, I would seek out someone who has that ability, someone who, I'm going to call it privilege. They have that privilege to do it. And so I would be seeking out someone who is not the same sex as me, because I really want to understand what their biases are and how they're showing up in a room as well. So again, same identity relationships can be problematic. Intergenerational relationships is also something that I would like to touch on. Intergenerational relationships just means that it's okay to have a mentor that is either older than you or younger than you. I am seeking now a mentor that is younger than me for the purpose of the social media aspect. I thought I was doing good with LinkedIn and Facebook. There's a lot of other social media aspects out there, are opportunities out there. And so when you think about your mentorships, again, we have to be very clear and very specific on what it is that we want. And so for me, the intergenerational, it's not that someone younger than me or Gen Z, that's the only thing that they can teach me, but it is definitely something that they've grown up with. And so they know it like the back of their hand. So I have to take my bias away that, yes, I'm a CEO. I've had multiple organizations or multiple companies. I have a master's degree. I literally am looking for a high school intern, someone or a high school mentor, someone that can show me what can be done in social media. And I'm not afraid to do that. I don't have a bias against the younger generation. like a lot of my colleagues do, I'm not seeking them for, how do you get a job and keep a job for 20 years? I wouldn't ask a Gen Z that, because number one, they haven't had the experience. And number two, I don't know if that's really what their generation is looking to do. So intergenerational relationships, our mentorships are very important. And so make sure that you're looking around at who you have access to and making sure that you're utilizing them for the skills that they have, because it's not about titles and it's not about money. It's really about their experiences and their access. And it just so happens that there are certain generations that have more access and understanding of the social media from my perspective. And then last, I talked about this, just be willing to learn from your mentee. There is nothing wrong with that. Again, if you have a plan, that's important, but it's okay to kind of pause and learn from someone else. So how do you find a mentor? And I'm going to take it back, because I feel like I've been all over the place. I'm going to take it back to someone that can help you with implicit bias. I just want to make a few statements here that you definitely do not want to seek out the only person, and I'll put this with race, the only Black person in your organization to mentor you on bias, to have those conversations. The reason is that person is more than likely always tapped for their experience or understanding. I have been the only Black person in many situations, and it's almost as if I'm asked to be the spokesperson for that community, when in fact I'm not the spokesperson for that community, because my experiences have been different. My experiences have been different because of the educational path that I've taken, or the career path that I've taken, or my fearlessness to lead my own companies or start up my own companies and be a salesperson. I'm just a different person. And so I just want to make a note that when you're looking for a mentor, as it relates to implicit bias, be very sure that you're not leaning on the only Black person in that organization. And if you are, and you've had a genuine relationship with them, that's different. But you can't come up to me and say, you know what, Zenovia, I really want to learn more about implicit bias. Do you mind mentoring me? Because I'm really trying to build my portfolio. And, I ask, well, why, why me? Well, you're the only Black person that works here. So I know it's probably different for you than it is for me. You don't want to do that. So other ways that you can find a mentor would be to put your pride aside. And what I mean by that is you cannot judge someone based on their title, based on what you think success looks like in their life. And so just because you're learning from someone, let's say you have a PhD, it's okay to learn from someone who has a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree or no degree at all, right? So it's okay, but in order for you to find the best mentor for yourself, you are going to have to put your pride aside and also put your biases aside as it relates to that particular subset of people that you're looking at or goals that you need. The next one is be open. Be open to a different relationship, be open to a different way of thinking, and be open to your experiences, and their experiences are going to be different. And if you're open to that, then that's where the learning really comes in. You don't want someone who maybe has had the same experiences that you've had, because that won't actually help you move forward. So you have to be open from learning from someone that doesn't look like you, that doesn't share the same thoughts or processes that you share. So just make sure that you are open. The next one is interview. I interview any person that comes to me to where they want me to be a mentor. And that interview process is really finding out what do they need to ensure that I'm the right person. And again, is this the right time? This isn't the plan that we put together once we've decided it. This is just an initial interview to decide if we are going to be a good fit for one, if we're going to be a good fit for one another. And it's okay. It's just like sorry, I dropped my pen. It's just like, you know, when you go for a job interview, you want to make sure that there's a match there. You want to make sure that there is an understanding, that there is respect there. And so for me, when I interview mentees, I go over a list of questions. One of them is, why do they want a mentor? And what do they know about mentor-mentee relationships? And then that kind of takes me back to my other slide where we talked about the cadence and the goal setting and all of that. I want to understand what they know, so that way I know where to start with them. If they say they know nothing, that's perfectly fine. That's not a reason to not be a mentor. It really just helps me as the mentor to make sure that we're going in at the right level. So that interview process is very important and very crucial for both the mentee and the mentor. And then be present. Being present is probably the most important factor here on how to find a mentor. You are currently in a room, let's see, I want to say we have about 45 people in here. You are currently in a room with 45 people, half of which you've taken multiple implicit bias or bias workshops with this institute. So that's not to say what they've done outside of this institute. But these are folks that you can reach out to and make those connections with to see if you have some alignment and see if there's an opportunity for you all to share experiences and understanding and maybe be a mentor and a mentee relationship. But if you're not in the room, you know, they say this in corporate, right? If you're not in the room, you're on the menu, right? You're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you just want to make sure that you are present. And when I say present, I mean present as your whole self. I get to be in this space as what I call many people, right? So I have a daytime job that lends me the opportunity to connect and build within my own community and work with folks who have a passion for entrepreneurship, the same as I do. But I also am building my career on implicit bias in my consulting firm. And it's something that I've been doing for a very long time. And I am present in this moment, and I'm present in every interaction that I'm in. And those are the reasons why I've been afforded different opportunities, because I come in the room as my whole self. And I think if you are interested in getting a mentor, being in these spaces are probably the safest spaces to be and the best places to be. And I would encourage you to reach out to someone, even someone maybe in your organization, that you haven't worked with before, or just sending like a blanket email. I've been in workshops like this, and I would send a link like, here's my calendar. I'd love to connect with any of you guys who are in here today and just share thoughts and perspectives. And I've been able to create some really great interactions and get some really good sponsors that way as well. And I'll go over what a sponsor is just in case anyone doesn't know. And then again, be honest about what it is that this person can do for you. Be honest about what you can bring to the table as well. And I think as mentors, we feel like we have to bring everything to the table. We are the superior in the relationship, when in fact their enthusiasm to get to where we're going should be good for us and should build us up as people as well. So just making sure that we are our full selves when we're going into these interactions, and then seeking experience over titles. And I'll just let that sit for a second, because titles can be very scary for people. And I think that is a hindrance for folks to learn, because they feel like, well, this person is a CEO or this person has a doctorate degree, and that is intimidating for people. And so you want to seek what their experiences are over what their titles are. So it's almost as if their titles do not matter. I did not have in my repertoire, like, I want to be a CEO when I grow up, and so I'm going to connect with CEOs. That's not how that happened for me. I was seeking experiences and I was seeking opportunities. Work-life balance is very important to me. Autonomy is important to me. Being able to make clear, concise decisions are important to me. So I found people in my life that I could attach myself to that gave me those same opportunities. And I didn't look at their titles, because if I looked at their titles, well, I really need to connect with a council member. I wouldn't have been able to do that at 20, 25, probably even 30 years old, because I didn't have a tidge of imposter syndrome at 30. I had a lot of imposter syndrome at 30 years old. So again, when you're seeking someone, take their title out of it and maybe seek just what their experience is and how they can bring you full circle into a room. So next, we're going to go. Awesome. So this is probably my favorite part of this presentation, and I'll just give a little backstory. So sponsorship and mentorship at its core is really this. Everyone in this room can be a sponsor. Not to say everyone in here can't be a mentor, but I don't know what your schedules look like, or your time, or your abilities, or your teaching style. I don't know any of that. But what I do know is that everyone can be a sponsor. And what I mean by sponsor, a sponsor is someone that has access to a room that you don't have access to, and they give you access. Let me give you an example of how that plays out. So about 3 years ago, one of my colleagues saw me speak at an event. And she saw me speak at an event that we were there separately. It had nothing to do with work. And she recommended that I speak with an organization that she was attached to outside of that conference that we were at, because she said she liked the way that I spoke, and it was really easy for her to understand. And I drilled down, on what I needed to drill down. And she said, I really want you to connect with these people. Those people happen to be Kim and Ann and the Institute. And I did a workshop for them, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember now. But I say all that to say, it wasn't that me and that person, we had a mentor relationship in their job or in our plan. It was to get me any speaking engagements. It was her sponsorship, because she saw me as the whole person. She knew what I did for work, and she knew that I also had a passion for DEI and implicit bias. And so what she did is she gave me access to a room that I would have otherwise not had access to. I think organizations, and I lead an organization, I do the same thing. You kind of go with, well, who are the great speakers in our community that speak on DEI? Or who are the folks in our community that can build a roof? Who in our repertoire, anyone in this room, who do you know that can do a presentation on workforce development or economic development? And we sit in this room and we just pull resources from one another. So what a sponsor does is someone who normally would not have access, they give access to. So for me, I don't have a doctorate degree. I don't have a website stood up. I don't have all of the things that you think you would need in order to have access to an audience like you, right? And that's because someone sponsored me. And once I connected with both Kim and Ann, the sponsorship just continues. They continue to pour into me, and they continue to give me opportunities. And that's what sponsorship is about. So they're like my pseudo mentors, where they are constantly building me up, giving me access, and I appreciate that. So that's the difference between sponsorship and mentorship. So number one, access. As a sponsor, everyone in this room, I've looked at the titles, I've looked at the list, everyone in this room can be a sponsor for another person, and you can actually do it today. When you are in a room or any decision-making table, and let's say you have they're requesting the same speakers, they're requesting the same company to do XYZ. Your job as a sponsor is to say, hey, I met so-and-so, and I think they would be really great at this. Do you guys want me to pass their information on, and maybe we can just have them come in and talk about it, right? So that's how you sponsor someone who typically is not able to get into a room, right? Privilege. We all have privilege. We all have this underlying privilege. I'll give you an example. Not able to say it a lot, but I am able to say it in certain instances. When the pandemic hit, I was privileged enough to work in an organization and have a position that allowed me to bring my child to work with me. When school was not in session and her other parents had to work, I was one of those parents that could actually take one of her parents that could actually take her to work with me. That was a very privileged moment. And it wasn't until, and I didn't even realize that, it wasn't until I had employees or I had businesses say, oh my gosh, I don't know, and daycare. And then we started having the conversation about daycare. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is definitely, I'm speaking from a place of privilege because not everyone can do that. And so your job, when you have privilege, your job is to give someone else access. Right. And so I had this privilege. So I thought, well, I better start getting on the phone and talking and looking at daycare centers and talking to folks about how you build these little cohorts and, let's work with your schedule, right? We have 5 moms that need to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. They're off at 5. And then we've got our evening moms. Are we going to do some sort of swap? Are we going to meet someone's house and help with online learning? I mean, really, it just activated me to make sure that my privilege was being used for the greater good. And I think that's all, it's a whole nother presentation, but I think that's all what we're supposed to do with our privilege is we're supposed to figure out how do we give that privilege to other people and allow them to have access. Another thing about sponsorship versus mentorship is I think in mentorship relationships, I have, and I'll speak for myself, I've been in a position where I want to appear smarter than I am. And so I don't really bring my whole self and I don't talk about the things that I really struggle with at my core because I don't want the mentor to feel like they are, and this is all in the past, I don't want the mentor to feel like they're my counselor. I don't want them to feel like it's too much of a commitment. And so I wasn't bringing my whole self. In order for someone to sponsor you, you have to bring your whole self into a situation, even if it is something like Zenovia. I know nothing about implicit bias. I know nothing about, this critical race theory, or I know nothing about anything, right? My job is to say, oh, great. Well, guess what? Now I have access to these wonderful free workshops put on by the Institute. And now you can have access through me. But because if they didn't bring their whole selves and they didn't tell me that they were having an issue, then I wouldn't be able to sponsor them. I know that there are a few folks in this room that based on my relationship with the Institute, I gave them access to this room. Otherwise, they wouldn't because they're not in education. They're not part of any of the, excellence centers. And so again, sponsorship is really allowing people to bring their whole selves and then giving access to the person that we don't see every day, to the person that you're not able to be on a daily basis, right? And so there's no time commitment either. This is what's different between sponsorship and mentorship. Mentorship should be on a cadence. There should be a significant amount of time put into this relationship to ensure that the goals are met. And so time commitment, there is no time commitment. It really is about giving access and saying, hey, what about Zenovia? What about Dr. Cameron? What about Kim? It's really no time commitment. It's you going out on a limb and saying, this is the way that we typically do things. And this is maybe something that we can change as an organization to do. Classroom engagement. This one, it doesn't fit on this slide, but I had nowhere else to put it. And I wanted to talk about it because I think it's important for all of our faculty members or teachers in the room. I think your classroom engagement is very important. And it's a great time for you to be a sponsor. They are looking for you to teach, but I don't know which districts everyone is in, but I've had deep conversations and also access into classrooms. And typically the teacher does not look like the students. And if you are in a place where that happens, please raise your hand and let other folks know where that's happening, because we want to know what school districts or colleges or institutions are doing to get their faculty to match their student population. So your classroom engagement. This is how you are a sponsor in your classroom. Let's say you are teaching welding, right? And you are a white male and you have in your class people of color. Your job is to bring in a guest speaker so that can help you with that class, even if it's for 30 minutes, what it does for the student is allows their student to see themselves. And that's going to go a lot further than just saying, well, there's opportunities for everyone in this industry. You are now a sponsor for all of those students in the classroom, because we all know if you can see it, you can believe it. And so making sure that those engagements are that you're allowing students to be engaged with other people, not just yourself. Again, you have to put your biases aside. Like, I'm the faculty member, I'm the best person for this job, when in fact, if you truly are concerned with students and their success, I believe that you sponsor them and allow them to see folks who look like them, speak like them, come into the classroom and engage in such a way that it really builds you as a teacher too, because then they feel like they are being seen. And so I would encourage all of you to bring in speakers into your classroom that match the demographic of students. Offer out-of-the-box thinking. Again, that's a sponsorship. You have access to an opportunity. Your job is to think about, how do we change the norms? And that whole just because it's broke, don't fix it. That's why we're constantly having conversations about the difference between equality and equity. And so again, if you think or offer out of the box thinking and try to bring folks along, that it is our biases that lead us to believe that the person speaking today should have a doctorate degree, or leads us to believe that the person speaking today should be a Black woman just because it's an implicit bias, or leads us to believe that your mentor has to have a certain status and a title and a car and all of that. Those are all biases. And so you are just, as a sponsor, offering up this out of the box thinking, and then also breaking the norms. You are literally taking everything that you were taught as a individual in an organization. You want to stay in line with the company. You want to stay lock and step with the company because it's part of their mission and it's their vision, and it's part of their culture. And so you're breaking the norms as it relates to culture by doing things that are outside of the box and offering opportunities for folks that typically would not have access there. So that's the difference between sponsorship and mentorship. And if there's anything I would say for my presentation that I'd like for you to walk away with today, is take a look and assess, over the weekend on what access do I have, and when can I bring someone else in that does not know that this opportunity exists? That's going to be an actual activity. Sit down, write it down, look at your privilege and your access, and find a person that next week you can give access to something that they didn't have access to before. And so in conclusion, I feel like I'm going so fast. How am I at the end already? Okay. So in conclusion, mentorship offers, my screen is in the way, offers career growth. And so again, that is the purpose of mentorship, is to offer career growth and give access to different opportunities. And I think we can't shy away from the fact that, and Dr. Rita talked about it earlier, that there are folks who work in a 9-to-5 job, but they also are building their portfolio to eventually do something different. Their career growth might not be exactly the same as what you would do, but as a mentor, that's not what you do. You don't kind of interject what you would do at this point. It is, I want to help you get to where you need to go. Not saying that you don't guide them down that path, but what I'm saying is you can't say you have to be a supervisor, then a manager, then an executive. Like, there's no pathway. What you're doing is building skills for their career growth. So when I talk about this generic skill set, the generic skill set is, and these are things that I know to be true, in order to move up in your career, your communication skills, both written and verbal, need to be at a higher level. You need to be able to be uncomfortable in uncomfortable situations. There needs to be some level of confidence that you have in order to move your career or business forward. And so with these generic skill sets, what it's doing is kind of offering collaboration with this person or maybe another person. So if you're not a good public speaker and you know that this is going to be important for this particular mentee, your job again is to give them access to someone who can help them with that, because you want to send your mentee out as their whole selves and give them everything that they've asked for in the plan. And sometimes that plan does not include you, but it includes your network. And I call it your personal board of directors. We each have our own personal board of directors that help us all make decisions, or maybe you call them your go-to crew. I'm not sure what you call them, but there are certain people in your life that you call on and say, hey, I'm having this issue. Can you assist? That is the same thing for your mentor-mentee relationship. You want to make sure that you're giving them access there and offer collaboration with other folks. The next one is race, gender, age, and career. These all play a huge part in who we choose for a mentee, how we mentor, and what that success is going to look like. And so you have to take all of those things off of the table and make sure that you're exploring the experience as a whole. So again, you want to make sure that the race, age, and the gender doesn't matter. Your career interest, it matters, but again, it depends on where your mentee is going. So let your biases or put your biases aside. And I think that would make for a better mentor-mentee relationship. Sponsorship versus mentorship. If you are able to be a mentor, that is great. But if not, the best thing that you can do is be a sponsor for someone. And last but not least, it's a hard relationship, but it is a valuable relationship. And so I would just offer that you get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Zenovia and Dr. Rita Cameron-Wedding. We are going to pivot over to Q&A now, so feel free to post any questions you have in the chat. We do have one question so far, and this is for Dr. Rita Cameron-Wedding. Jennifer Johnson asked, is it your opinion that it's better to be focused rather than generalist in implicit bias?
That's a great question. So I think in implicit bias, when you think of the term intersectionality, it's like all these systems interact together. So they're all connected in some way. So if your focus is looking at transgender people, if your focus is looking at gender in general, understand that both of those categories will intersect with race. And so while you might have a specialty in implicit bias that focuses on race, or you might have a specialty that focuses on transgender people, but you have to understand the impact of race on transgender people. So I think both of those things apply, and I think it's important that we continue to develop and hone our talents and skills. And I don't have an expertise in everything, quite honestly, and I've been doing this work for a long time. But I do what I do. I try to develop my skill strengths in the areas that I'm most comfortable with, and I know about the others. And even though I've taught in disciplines that address a lot of these issues, it doesn't mean that I'm going to become an expert in everything.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Rita. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, I did put a post survey link in the chat if everyone could fill that out. And we are going to be sending a link to this recording out to everybody and a link to all of the resources that were shared. I am going to leave the chat open for a little bit longer if any more questions come in. We do have about 15 more minutes available. Zenovia, Rita, do you have any last minute comments you would like to add?
Well, I have a quick question for Zenovia. As a young Black woman, could you speak to us about the work that you've done that has led you to your work as a CEO in your own company? I think that would be would be very interesting for me to know, and I'm sure others would like to know that as well.
What was that? What I've done?
Yeah, what is your pathway to where you are now?
Yeah. So I would have to start a little, further back. So, well, I'm not going to say my age, but I'm just going to start back, right? So I did not take the traditional educational route. I actually didn't go to college until I was 29 is when I started my bachelor's degree program. And the reason for that is because I just didn't grow up in a place where education for me was most important. What was most important for me was getting out on my own, being able to make my own decisions. And so I didn't take that traditional route. What happened though during that time is that I found out that I was really good at sales and I was really good at communication and being able to listen to other people and have a lot of empathy and sympathy for folks. And so I took my career as a call center, worked at a call center, and I was managing in a call center. And then I went to college. Again, when I was 29, I went to college, and it just so happens that my advisor was having some issues, and I was trying to walk my own advisor, my college advisor, through some of her issues. And she said, you know what, Zenovia, I really feel like, you would be a great advisor at the college. And I thought, well, I don't know about that. I'm not that smart. I just started college. I don't know if I could do that job. And she goes, but it's just the way that you communicate and talk to people, right? And so I did that job and I had that job. Then fast forward to where I am now. So in my tenure at the university, I was not sure where I wanted my career to be. And I had so many access to so many students that I was like, well, there has to be more out there for Zenovia. And so I started to, my manager at the time asked me, what is it that you want to do? I said, I'm really interested in race and equity. Because in the seat that I'm sitting in as a student, I saw a lot of our Black and brown students come in and get student loans and have absolutely no idea how they were going to pay them back, when they were going to pay them back. The fact that it was a loan, I mean, it just was mind blowing. And I said, I don't know if we as an institution are really set up to support them. And so I need some outside help. And so my manager paid for me to be certified as a DEI professional and sent me away to school. And then I started to work within the Pacific Northwest Diversity Council, which is out of Houston, but I was running the organization here in Western Washington and Oregon. And I just I literally fell in love with it. And then I all of a sudden had these goggles on where I was looking at everything with an equity lens. And I thought, well, everybody should do this. Everybody should be looking at every situation with these goggles on and think about, well, I'm making this decision and this is how it affects other people. Now I was on the opposite end of that. How come I wasn't getting the jobs that I wanted? How come I didn't go to college before? Like I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have access. And so again, I had these glasses on. And when I put these glasses on, I thought equity is probably our biggest problem in society. And how do I now take these glasses and start to just pass them out and give them to people? And then I'll tell you one quick story. So when the opportunity came for me to apply for the CEO position at the chamber, I had that moment. I said, how dare you, Zenovia, go from a manager to a CEO of a 72-year-old institution? You are just not that bright. But what I did is I tapped into my resources and I tapped into what I call my personal board of directors, women and men in my life. And I'm like, listen, I want to do this, but I'm scared. And then, like any good steward, I did my research on chambers and, chambers of commerce, and they just started letting women in 10 years ago. So I was like, oh my goodness gracious, this is going to be an uphill battle. And then I did further research and I realized that the only other Black person that was leading a chamber in my state was a former mayor. So then I thought, oh, they really don't. Not only do they just start letting women, but they definitely don't want a young Black woman that doesn't have what I thought the credentials needed to be, because the only person I see doing the job was a former mayor. So I just felt like I wasn't qualified. But it wasn't until I did what I think we all should do, is lean on someone else. And then I started to make my phone calls. I want to do this, but I'm scared. What do I do? And they obviously had the glasses on. They're like, look, Zenovia, these are the things that you've done. You are positioned right now to be on the same ticket as Barack Obama via your relationship with the National Diversity Council. There's something to be said about that. You are doing millions of dollars for nonprofit organizations in your community because you're a community organizer. There's something to be said about that. So think less about what position you're in at that moment and think more about what you can do for the community, and use those glasses. Constantly use those glasses and shine a light on inequities within our community. And so I never took the traditional route to anything. I think I jumped around. I probably, in some people's opinion, I jumped a couple of steps maybe, but I did that because I just started to have a little bit more confidence within myself. And I attached myself to people. I've attached myself to Rita without knowing. I've followed her when I, had the opportunity to hear her speak with this institute. And so, I'm a non-traditional person, and I believe that everyone has something that you can learn from and lean on. And I think if we all do that, we would be moving a little bit faster. And so I don't even remember what your question was.
Well, you answered it.
Okay.
And what I wrote in the chat is awesome journey, love hearing it. So this is what you just talked about, is the point of our whole presentation, is that there's a space and a place in this for everyone. You may not know it yet, but once you start this journey, it's like, and you identify the right people. Thank you so much also for your presentation. Knowing the right people, being the right person as a mentor, knowing the right people who can sponsor you can take you such a long way. So great. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, but first I want to thank you both for your presentation, and just really, there's just some great things that I'm taking away from this. And Zenovia, I heard you at the Empower Women conference a couple of years ago, and was just drawn to what you had to say and your authenticity. And so it's really nice to see you both here. I do have a question, partly because I'm just really, I'm actually kind of surprised by the thought that you've brought to my mind, as far as everyone has a place for this. And I've often stepped back and kept myself out of the forefront of this, because I really think that as a white cisgender woman, I've been at the forefront of so much in my voice being heard, and that it's really my responsibility to step back and listen and learn. And I'm curious your thought on it, because I see myself having a role in bringing awareness about implicit bias and being part of that. I think we can all, it's obvious from what you're saying in this talk today about everyone having a role to play in educating others. I'm curious, in your experience, or as far as what you think is ideal, do you see the best way to educate and bring awareness is with individually, or as like a group of diverse people who can speak from different perspectives? how do you see that being the most effective and one that's going to ways that are going to make it more likely to be heard and acted on? Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yes. I can start. I think allyship is the only way we can get to our destination. I mean, we have to have, everyone has to be at the table. Everyone has an investment in the outcome of this huge endeavor and project that we call diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think there's a space and a place for everyone. I happen to be married to a woman who is a white woman, and who nobody would, when we're together in public spaces, nobody would ever think that we belong to each other, because there's 20 years difference. She's 20 years younger. She's blonde. She weighs barely 105 pounds. And I mean, all of those differences, but she understands, and we met because she understood. She could talk about race. We had those fundamental conversations, and she is my absolute best supporter. And we work on just about, she runs equity for a state agency. And this is the work that we do. And thank God that she's sitting at that table, because to date, she has brought in more women of color into a department of almost 75,000 people than ever before in history. So I'm super excited that she's there, and she's able to teach people who look like her and help them understand differently. So everybody has a place, and we all have a responsibility. So thank you so much for asking the question, Liz, because this is not the work that people should do in isolation. I do think sometimes it's harder, because sometimes some people do feel like, this is a voice that, the people of color, the historically disenfranchised people, should take center stage. I think there might be certain situations where that might be true, but I think in general, the work that you do in your world and your institution is opening the doors for a lot of people.
Thank you. I love the mention of responsibility too, because I think it's all our responsibility, and some more, even more so than others.
I absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm nothing additional. And I would agree that we all have a place in this, but keeping in mind that it's not to be easy. We can say it over and over and over again. It's really going to take a lot of work. So I wouldn't expect to see a lot of change really fast, depending on your level of impact, but I wouldn't expect to see something change really quickly as it relates to a system. But what I can see is that you can look at a student, you can look at the folks around you in the room, and you can see that what you're doing is making a difference, even if it's for one person, right? Supporting that person in the room that, this happens all the time, and I don't know why it keeps happening. And I tell people when I go in, please don't piggyback off what I'm saying, and don't take my ideas, like just have your own thoughts, right? So in a room where you say something, or a man says something, or, maybe a higher up says it, and now it's a great idea, but the person starts there. I think it starts with you saying, okay, I think I just heard Dana say that. And so let's give Dana her credit for that, right? Because now, guess what? Now you have Dana on your side, and now you and Dana are on the same page, and Dana knows Liz is not playing with these people today. And so Liz is going to be my supporter. So now it's not just Liz speaking up, it's you and Dana speaking up. And so what you're doing is building your allyship that Dr. Cameron talked about. It's like, you want to kind of get people along one person at a time. And like she said, she's been doing this for a very long time. I'm very new into this space, but for me, I don't look for changing a whole room. I look for that one person that's like, ping, now I have that person. So I would look for that instead of this big systemic change or systems change. You're going to get tired quickly with that.
Great. That's great advice. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to thank you for the statement you made. When you, excuse me, when you have privilege, your job is to give access. That just really stuck with me. So thank you. And this has been amazing.
You're more than welcome, no problem.
Okay, thank you everyone for your questions and comments, and thank you Zenovia and Dr. Rita Cameron-Wedding. I just wanted to say that we will be sending out a link to this webinar and then all of the links as well. And with that, we will give everyone an extra 5 minutes to their day. Again, thank you all.